Okay, we are happy to be joined today by Dallas Stars Assistant GM Mark Janko, who joins us today. It's Mark. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate being here.
So one of my favorite things about Mark's story is we see people in GMs or executive assistant GMs chairs, and everyone has a different path to get there. And I think until our friend Tom Holy, I don't think anyone had a similar path to Mark. So, Mark, kind of take us through, give us kind of the background. How did kind of your journey from your background in media relations and everything like that kind of led to the role now here?
Yeah, no, well, first of all, I'm a big Tom Holy fan. I think the world of Tom, as I think everybody in the hockey world does. And he's doing a great job in San Jose now there for 2 years. And him and I have spoken a lot because you're right. We kind of had similar backgrounds. I worked in public relations, media relations for 8 years with the Stars. And then after that, I think it was the 2008 off season. Les Jackson was a co-general manager with Brett Hull at the time, and Les always kind of saw things in me that I necessarily, I didn't even see in myself. Whether it was how I can help this organization in a different role, and he came to me in that summer of 2008 and offered me to come up and start learning the hockey operations side of things, getting my feet wet on CBA, salary cap, which was pretty new. I think it only had been in the league then 3 or 4 years. And so I came under Les. Frank Provenzano was the assistant GM at the time, and I learned from those guys a lot. Then Joe Newendike came in the following year. I knew Joe from being when I was in public relations, Joe was a player, and Joe and I were pretty close. And then I kind of grew under Joe into a little bit bigger role. And then really the step that really helped me out and the guy, Les was big, Les Jackson. Joe Newendike was big, and then the guy that really kind of gave me all the responsibilities of an assistant GM was Jim Nill when he got hired here in Dallas in 2013. And I remember Jim. I was actually going to go back. Jim got hired. Jim didn't know me very well, and it was April of 2013. And Jim was I think I was gonna get moved back to public relations. Actually, I'd been up in the hockey operations department for 5 years. Jim was gonna bring in his own people, and Jim and I hit it off. Really, he told me, he said, "Look, I need you to work here for a week, and then we're gonna put you over on the business side. Am I gonna hire new people? But give me everything you got for a week." And I said, "Absolutely, I'll give you everything I got." And so we got really close quickly over that week. And after the week, he met with me and he said, "Hey, look, I'm not going to give you the assistant GM title, but I'm going to give you all the responsibilities. And you got to prove to me over these next couple years what you've proven to me over this last week that you can do it. But you got to do it every week in, week out." And it was a really good message for me, and that's kind of how I grew after. I think it was after 2 years, maybe three, where then he gave me the assistant GM title. That would have been in 2015. Now we're 9 years later from there, and I've been working with Jim for, I guess, 11 years now, and that's kind of how I grew into the role that I have now with the team.
So you mentioned as kind of one of your responsibilities now as an AGM is handling a lot of the cap and CBA related matters. Just broadly speaking, not necessarily specific to what Dallas is doing, but just what does an internal capologist do, if you will? Where do those sort of responsibilities come down to in terms of your day to day and week to week?
Yeah, no, good question. I can't speak for other teams. For myself, during the season, you're tracking your cap and everybody else's cap every day. We've got a system internally to do that. So we look at our cap. Who can we recall from the minor leagues? What are your, you get closer to the trade deadline. What can you afford coming in? Are you an LTI? Are you not? Are you going to come out of LTI? Are you not going to come out of LTI by the end of the year? Those types of things are things every single day that Jim, Scott White, who's in the office as well, runs our minor league team, but has a big impact on what we do with the Dallas team. All three of us talk every day about the cap, every day. There isn't a day that goes by where we're not talking about our current cap. So I'm handling all that, trying to track that every day, and I'm tracking the other 31 teams in the league as well daily, and looking kind of what they're at. And other things come into it. You're not just looking at this year. I would say every day we look at the current year that you're in, say for 23-24, and it's November. You're November 15th. You're looking at your 23-24 cap. You're also looking at your 24-25 cap, projecting out what you're going to be in 24-25. Obviously you don't know. There's some variables that you can or can't control that, you're not really able to pinpoint where you're going to be at, but you can make projections. There have been times where in October or November, you have a cap set for 23-24, but then for 24-25, you start projecting numbers. And then by January, you grab that and you throw it in the trash can because either a player is out, perform those projections on a contract coming out of entry level, or they haven't. They've gone the other way, and you're like, okay, we might be able to maybe get this guy at a different number that's lower, and that might help our cap in the future. So you're always looking at the day, every day you're looking at the cap for the season you're in. Probably I'd say every other day to a week, you're looking at the following year. And then even, every other week to a month, we'll even look out 3 years. So we're projecting the cap 1, 2, and 3 years out for us. We don't necessarily do that for other teams, although we are looking at them for the 1 year, for the year you're in. Other things like handling everything with the National Hockey League, no trades, signing bonuses, making sure you're, compliant with the collective bargaining agreement with contracts, and everything like that. I do all of our staff contracts as well, handling scouts, trainers, coaches, everybody that falls under the hockey operations umbrella and doing their contracts. And then player contracts, Scott White, Jim Nill, myself, we usually split up all the contracts for the players, dealing with the agents and signing restricted and unrestricted free agents, if that may be. That's basically the gist of it. There's other things probably that go into it that I can't think of right now. But it's definitely a full-time gig, in terms of every second of every day. It feels like, you're on call and you're busy. But I enjoy it. I love it. It's a privilege to work in the National Hockey League. I'm sure you guys feel like it's a privilege to cover the National Hockey League as media members. And, every day has been, is really, and I love the Dallas Stars organization. It's a great organization. Tom Gillardy is a great owner. Jim Nill, there's not probably get into Jim more in a little bit. There's not a better man that you can work for than Jim Nill. Scott's great here. We have a great setup, and I like I said, I just think it's a privilege and an honor to work here.
So I have a couple follow-ups, but the first one, it's because it's fresh in everyone's mind right now because the Washington Capitals publicly have announced they're buying one of the most used public-facing sites, CapFriendly. And then there's been we've seen stories and reporting from others about how some teams are scrambling and everything like that. I know you guys are not one of those teams that's scrambling. I know, yep. And your experience coming to the Stars, as the cap was becoming one of the bigger things, obviously, as you joined, how long have you guys had the internal cap tools where we've had everything, we've tracked everything? Like, what's been the evolution of that when you look at it? Because it was actually, I'll be honest, it was kind of surprising for me, and I'm not asking anyone to comment on any other team. I'm just going off of Elliott's reporting where he says, hey, there's teams that are scrambling. And that was kind of surprising to me to see. And so from your perspective, from what you know with the Dallas Stars, how long has everything been in-house, handled the way that it has for you guys?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Sean. I was surprised to hear that as well. I don't know, how accurate or true that is. And I know Elliott listed, and Elliott's one of the best in the business in terms of being in the know, right? And having good scoops. He listed some teams in there, that had things set up. Dallas was not one of them. When Jim came in 2013, that was one thing we built out, was the cap side of it. We feel very comfortable internally in terms of tracking our own cap, tracking everybody's cap. There is a tool that all NHL teams have on, that the NHL provides, where you can go on and look up any contract, print out any contract, look at, no trades, look at, signing bonuses, structures, cash, cap. You can pull that up. We have all that internally that we can just click on and look at and see anytime we want. We've integrated over since 2013. I think that got set up on the cap side pretty intricately for us in 2013. We've added in there analytics, sports science, other kind of variables that have grown over the last, I guess, 10 to 11 years. And as we've grown out in terms of building out departments for analytics and sports science and those types of things, we've had to integrate those into kind of our cap, internal stuff. And we feel very comfortable with it. The other thing I will say is I thought CapFriendly did a fantastic job. There were times where it was easy access. I was online. I needed to look something up and I went to CapFriendly. And so I feel like they were a very good secondary tool for an organization like us, but not a primary tool. And like I said, I think, Dominic, who started it, Jamie, who kind of was running it now, they were accurate, professional. I thought they did a really good job. I think they probably helped media, fans, probably business side, whether it's owners or presidents or other people that work on the business side that wanted to access things like that for teams. I think those were probably, CapFriendly was probably a valuable tool for those individuals. Not necessarily for us. It was like I said, a secondary tool for us, not a primary one. We feel very comfortable internally how we're set up to track caps. Again, not just for us, but for everybody. And we've added other things over the last few years in terms of, like I said, analytics, sports science, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, I used the example the other day where someone said, like, oh, you see all these teams have CapFriendly on their laptops at the draft. Well, I don't know what your internal system looks like. So if I have my binoculars and I try to look at your laptop from the Meteorizer at the draft later this month, I don't know, but I know what CapFriendly looks like. So I use that as an example to someone where we have no idea what's on those other 16 laptops when there's the one person with CapFriendly up at the draft.
Yep.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, so with Dallas, how you guys have built your team, and Jim, one of Jim's lines is his job as a GM is to worry about today, tomorrow, 5 years from now. And obviously you can only really do that if you're heavily focusing on making sure your cap situation is well built out. With Dallas, between how the roster's been built, a perfect example is Joe Pavelski, who he will have, I believe, the $2 million performance bonus against next year. You've had some young players. You've had that melding of young guys coming off ELCs who can get Schedule A's, Schedule B's, things like that, and then over 35 plus. What's that been like in kind of this current Dallas window of managing kind of the cap space where you can use the tools accessible to you to move a Joe Pavelski cap hit from last year, like the $2 million, right, for the games played bonus to next year, but then you have to deal with in the future. What's that been like in working with Jim and working on building this cap situation for Dallas that keeps kind of rolling well that you guys have done?
No, yeah, I appreciate that comment. We're biased, but we think we're doing a good job. But the first thing you need the players to buy into what you're doing, and understand, like when we met with Joe signed the 3-year deal coming out of San Jose, and then we signed him to 2 1-year deals. And we had to meet with him and talk to him about, our cap situation. We laid out, we got a lot of respect for Joe. And we were pretty transparent and honest both ways. And Jim and myself sat down with Joe for both of those contract negotiations and showed him our cap, showed him everybody who was up, who we were projected to pay, what we were going to project him to pay, and that how he slotted in. We needed to do 1-year deals that performance bonused him up, that we would hit an overage for the following year. And Joe bought into that. Joe talked a little bit at the end of the year. I don't know if you guys saw his interview in the exit interviews. And the last minute and a half of it was really good. He said, talking about Thornton and Marlowe and San Jose always, took a little less. Everybody else bought into that below them, in order for them to play meaningful games. And what he means by that is everybody was buying into the fact that there's only one pie. And if somebody or 3 guys or 4 guys take up 75% of it, that it's going to be a lot less, and you're not going to be able to, probably build your team the way you want to build your team, in terms of depth and being a contender year in and year out. And, I think San Jose did a great job of that. And that was because of the players. Sure, Doug Wilson and Joe Will and San Jose did a good job on the hockey ops side, but their players bought into what they were doing. And I think Thornton and Marlowe led the way. We've had Pavelski lead the way on those things here. And I think it's filtered through our room, so that people, they want to play here, and B, they're going to buy into it, to what you're building. And so, ideally, you guys, you try and, if you have a player with a big cap hit that has 2 years left, you hope that, another guy that you just signed to 2 years, then the big cap hit guy comes off, and then you do an extension for the other guy in year 3. You try and work those things. I think we have. We're pretty strategic about that. And that's, why Jim's comment is he's looking at, he has one eyeball probably on year 1 or now, and then the other eyeballs on years 3 and 5. And that's probably what he's referring to, is you're always looking out to see, okay, when's this contract up? Okay, can we get this guy who's coming out of entry level on a 3-year deal because X player's up in 3 years, and then when that guy's due his big raise on a third contract, okay, well, this player's off, and then we can extend him at a number that probably makes sense within the marketplace. So those are things you're trying to do. That doesn't always work out perfectly. We have, just like all the other 31 teams, we've got skeletons in our closet, whether it's, draft, cap, hirings, whatever. There's always things that you do well, and there's things you don't do well. But what you try and do is learn from your past mistakes, to try not to make those mistakes again, knowing that you're probably going to make them, but try and minimize them. And I think that's where Jim is great. When you make a mistake, when I've made mistakes personally, I've made a lot of them in my career. Early on, I probably made a lot more, and probably more significant ones. There was a time, I'll tell you guys, it was I think my first or second year. It was not under Jim. It was my first or second year up in hockey operations. There's a deadline to activating players. So you have to do it by 5:00 Eastern. It must have been my first year. I didn't know that deadline. Jere Lehtinen was coming off of IR that day, skated in the morning skate, was ready to go. And I had something I had to do. I can't remember what it was, to be honest with you now, but I ended up activating him I thought you had to activate a player off IR before game time. So we played at 7:00. I got activated before 7. I get that, but I could activate him at 5:30 or 6 Eastern. I think I activated him at 5:07 p.m. without knowing there's a deadline. Guess what happened? National Hockey League called me and says he's ineligible to play tonight. There was a deadline of 5:00, and I said, "Oh my goodness!" So he couldn't play that game because of me, because of a mistake I made. I went down. Jere was very gracious. I had to go down, talk to the coaches. I owned it. I said I screwed up. I made a mistake, a big one. We had a player not playing in a game, and it was Jere Lehtinen. We ended up winning the game. And I remember saying to the coaches afterwards, I said, you know how it feels like when you are killing off a 5-on-3 for 2 minutes, and it's just in the playoffs, and it's tense, and the whole thing, I said, that's how I felt for 60 minutes tonight. Because I was just absolutely hoping we were going to win and get through it, so that even though, that mistake that I made that was significant, at least we didn't cost us the game. And it didn't. We ended up winning. I got razzed for it really hard by players, coaches, you name it. I took it. But actually, you know what? It ended up in some ways, especially because we won the game, it ended up being a blessing for me, because it was one of those things where details matter. And I've got to be detail oriented every day, every decision, anything that I touch, I better be plugged in and know the rules on it. And, it was good. It was a good lesson for me. But to my point, we make mistakes. And I think that's Jim's great about, hey, when you make a mistake, let's see why and talk about it. but let's not say that you're the worst assistant GM or worst director of amateur scouting or worst equipment manager or worst coach or worst player. Let's see, how can this make you better? And let's learn from this. And maybe this will help us grow into something that'll provide more success because we just had this failure. And so I think that's one thing that Jim has been fantastic with from day one coming in, and really enables the employees that work under Jim to be, feel free to, if you make a mistake, it's not going to be a killer. Let's learn from it.
I want to go back to something you mentioned a little bit earlier. You mentioned kind of talking about the cap every single day, between, your kind of core group. And so heading into periods where there's sort of those roster turnover sections, whether it's the trade deadline, unrestricted free agency, something like that, is this sort of a chicken or an egg scenario where you're sort of starting saying, I've got this amount of cap, this is the range of a type of player I can target? Or is it the other way around where you're maybe having someone say, we need this type of player, how can we make the cap work to fit that? And is there a difference in process in the way you approach it when it comes to players that are already within the organization, or, like you said, a Joe Pavelski that's external and you're sort of laying out the scenario for him? Just always curious about how those decisions ultimately get made.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think you have to have different scenarios. So I think you can have a plan A or priority A, but understand and know that even though that's our priority, to get X player at the trade deadline, what's the consequence of that? So you might need to move another player out. Or, for our situation with Tanev at the trade deadline, we needed to get another team involved in order to absorb only 25% of his cap. So we had to give up another asset in the Calgary and New Jersey trade, 3-team trade. We had to give up another asset in order to do that. So those are the things that you're talking about, and you always kind of have your priorities and then what sub priorities come after that. But also there's been times where plan A doesn't happen for whatever reason, whether it's cap, whether it's no move clauses, whether it's it just didn't happen. Another team blew that team out of the water that you wanted at the trade the player that you wanted. So another team came in and blew this team out of the water. Well, now you got to go to plan B, C, and D. And I think that's what we try and do here is when we make those decisions, let's have our plan, let's have our priority. How can we make that work cap wise? How can we make that work culture wise? I think those are the things you talk about, but also understanding and knowing that you might need to shift down to plan B, C, heck, maybe even plan D if you have to. And so that's kind of the process, at least for our team, that I think we try and do those things, whether it's, and what we call those times are hockey times, trade deadline, unrestricted free agency, draft. Those are the hockey times. Those are the times when, big decisions can be made to really help you succeed or, fail if you don't do those things right. And so, those are the hockey times. It doesn't minimize other times on November 23rd in the regular season when you're playing, game number, 18. Those are important as well, but the hockey times are the times that probably help build your organization up, not just for that year, but moving forward. And so that's kind of the process. If that answers I don't know if I did a good job of answering your question, but that's kind of, you got to have your scenarios, but you got to also understand that you might need a shift and have plans B, C, and D.
So you can have all of that laid out inside your offices, A, B, C, and D, but the Tanev trade's a perfect example where to get that done, you guys had to bring in another partner. You had to find help me peel back like a little bit. When you're like, okay, you and Calgary are like, you know what, we want Tanev, we like what you're offering us. How do you find the broker to help get it done? Is it something where there is kind of give me an idea of how that third team comes into play and how you kind of, and how that comes into the conversation? Because I would imagine at first it would happen to be you and Calgary are like, hey, we want to get this done for Tanev. And then you go kind of shopping for a third person. Kind of give me an idea of how that works. And obviously that's the one that's fresh in mind because of that deal for you guys this season.
Yeah, no, I think, for the most part on these deals, I can't speak for other teams. But for the most part on these deals, what happens is Jim's talking to the other 31 GMs, pretty much daily starting our trade deadline was March 8th this past year. So, starting middle of February to end of February, they're talking every day. And so you get a good read and feel for the guy or guys that you want to target and go after with that team. You're getting a pretty good read on Jim's really good at understanding, the market, and if we're getting close on something or if we're not. And I think once that heats up and you feel like we're getting close on this, but in order to make the cap, again, going back to what we talked about, you're talking every day about the cap. So we all understand what it is or what it isn't. We can't fit in our cap. So that once the priority asset is getting targeted and you feel like, okay, we're getting to a place where this could happen. Jim's also talking to teams about, players, but assets and cap. And there are teams that will voice their, hey, just so we'll broker a deal, if you guys need that. And they're not just telling us that, they're telling the whole league that, right? And they're probably telling the teams that are the buyers, whoever those teams are, whether it's, 6 teams that are buying, 12 teams that are buying, they're probably calling those teams and letting them know, hey, if you're buying and you're up against the cap, which, we track our own cap and we see your cap, let us know if we can broker a deal. And that's usually how it works. So you kind of feel that, the deal's getting, this could happen. And then you already know who the, 7, 8, 3, whatever amount of teams are that can broker a deal. And then you call and say, okay, this is getting close. If, this is the cash number, and that's what most of the teams want to know. Cause, if a team has $20 million in cap room and they're not buying, they're selling or they're not selling, they're just going to keep their $20 million in cap room. They're not so worried about, okay, that's a $4.5 million or a $2.25 million on our cap. They don't necessarily really care about that. They want to know what's the cash going to be. And so you have to lay that all out. It's for, 41 days, the rest of the season. That's going to be $342,000 or whatever it is cash for you to absorb the cap. And then you put a number on it for, is it a 4th round pick? Is it a 3rd round pick? Is it a 6th round pick? And that's kind of what you start kind of tracking down, and you go to past precedent and you look up kind of what other deals are, that have happened in the past for that cash amount for a team to take on that number. And then you kind of strike the deal, with all 3 teams, kind of in agreement. And then you go from there. And then you got to do the trade, because it was our first time doing one of those. So you can't do the future considerations anymore. So you have to have somebody going from, Calgary to New Jersey to Dallas, Dallas to Calgary. Somebody's got to go all that way. It has to be somebody on your reserve list to do that. And so you can't just sit there and say, okay, we're just going to trade future considerations to New Jersey for a 4th round pick. You can't do that anymore. So that's where that plays in, and you got to get on the call, and then you do 2 different trade calls. You do the call Calgary to Jersey and then New Jersey to Dallas. You do kind of 2 different calls. And that's kind of how it goes down, and how it went down this past year in March with Chris.
When you talk about that cash and the salary, and I was curious of this, and maybe I only know one end of this. So in Detroit, I asked Jeff Petrie about it this year, because Jeff Petrie is in Detroit as salary retained by, I believe, Montreal and Pittsburgh, and Jeff told me how he still only gets 1 check. He's not sure how he only gets 1 check, but he still gets 1 check. So
right.
from the team perspective, so we'll use Chris Tanev example, are the Calgary Flames and New Jersey Devils sending a check to the Dallas Stars to go into Chris Tanev's check, or how does that work here?
Yeah, it's a good question. So how it works is, Dallas will pay Chris Tanev his entire salary from the day you acquire him till the end of the regular season. So we pay the whole thing, and then you just invoice Calgary, you invoice New Jersey for their amounts. You can do it, you can do it every 2 weeks. You can do it at the end of the season, just the full amount, and then they'll reimburse us back for that salary that they owe on us, the 50% and the 25%, so that we only necessarily out of our pocket, after we get reimbursed, pay 25% of Chris's contract.
That's absolutely fascinating, because I appreciate you explaining that, because I've never understood that either. So that's actually kind of awesome to see how that plays out. I do have a bit of a put you on the spot question just because it's not something I asked you ahead of time. But, you've been working with the salary cap for pretty much since it's been come into play. What would you say is the biggest public misconception of managing the cap?
I think the biggest one is LTI. I think everybody thinks that LTI is just something where, okay, well, they can go over the cap by this amount, go get a $9 million guy. I just feel like that's one of those things where there is a misconception, in-season LTI, off-season LTI. There's certain teams right now that will probably build, say they're $5 million over the cap, and they can build to that number in the off season. People don't understand that it's like, oh, okay, they're 5 million over. They can go over 5 million. Well, yeah, they can in the off season, but then when they start their season, they got zero cap room. And that's tough to make flexibility unless they can add somebody else to LTI during the regular season, and then they can add to that pool. But I just feel like people kind of have a misconception on the LTI side of things. I'll even take Vegas as an example. There's a consequence to holding. People just think, oh, they're holding somebody out, and well, first of all, it's within the rules. they're doing things within the rules that are set right now. So I really don't have an issue with any of those teams, Chicago, Tampa, Vegas, any of those teams doing that, because it's within the rules. And so if it's within the rules, then I don't have an issue with it. But there is a consequence. The consequence is they were probably a top team in the Western Conference, but they got the 8th seed. They barely got into the playoffs. They might have missed the playoffs too, because Mark Stone's a very important player. But there was a consequence. It's not like it's just, okay, now they add Stone in game one and he's 100%. And now they're way over the cap, and that was unfair. I guess you can look at it that way. I don't. I look at it the opposite way. I think they did a very good job of playing within the rules. And they built their team to be one of the top teams in the West. The way that their team's built, and as good as they are, they could have been a top team in the West. And I guess I say that, and there's really no easy matchups anymore in the NHL. Like, it's just when you get in the top 16, 1-8, everybody's good, and there's no more payroll discrepancies like there were in 1998 or 1999, before the cap, that were, 70 million and 20 million or something like that, right? There's none of that anymore. Everybody's so tight against the cap and so close that, that's the way it is. But I guess to go back to your original question, I guess my point on that is, I think LTI would be the biggest misconception public wise. And there's just, the other thing is how easy it is to move players. I think sometimes fans, maybe media get a little bit, he's got to move X player, he's got to move Y player. Well, that's difficult, especially when there's no moves or no trade clauses, or a guy's at a big cap number. It's a little more difficult than people realize to do those things. It's not just like, oh, okay, this guy's not performing at $8.5 million. Oh, they just need to move him. I can't believe that management group can't move him. It's, oh yeah, there's things that go into that maybe might be out of the management group's control. And like I said, it could be no trade clauses, no moves, things like that. So, I think those would kind of be my ones that would say misconceptions with the cap, but LTI would probably be number one.
Another one that I kind of wanted to pick your brain on real quick, and this might be more a player, I should ask a player more or an agent, but the other one is, teams, it comes up every year, especially now that Florida's in the Cup final, a non-state tax state. And obviously you guys are in that situation in Dallas, I believe Nashville, Vegas, and I think Seattle are the only others, if I've got that right. When you kind of see that discussion where people will be like, oh, well, this is an advantage these teams have or whatever. How do you kind of look at that status of this is the non-state income tax? And I think the other thing, and I think we've talked about in this pod before, Prashanth, is, well, technically that's true. Players are also taxed when they play games in California. So it's not like they're getting zero tax dollars out. So kind of like, in your perspective, how should we look at that no income tax story that always comes out every single year? A team from the final happens to be playing in one of those states.
Yeah. No, I feel like it's important to look at, and not just like take me out of hockey for a second, take me out of the Dallas market even. Like if it was me, if it was my son, if my son was signing a contract, I would be pretty, I would look at what money's in your pocket. You know what I mean? And that would be actually number two. Number one would be, can you win? Are you going to a good team? And if the answer on number one is yes, and I like the team, it's a good team, it's going to win, I'm going to be competitive, then my number two thing would be, how much money are you going to get in your pocket? I think those would be number one and two for me outside of, and I know, I say that working with the Dallas Stars and a state income tax of Texas, but, I really genuinely mean that and believe that. And you can hold me to that if I ever work for another team that does have a state income tax. I just think those two things are important. Can you win? I think that's number one. Are you going to a good team? And number two, how much money are you going to get in your pocket after the contract is said and done? I think those things are real, both of them. And I think, like I said, I think personally, if it was me, if it was my son, if we're looking at things like that, I would advise him in that manner.
So I want to close this out by taking us again in a very different direction. You mentioned earlier, you and Jim Nill bonded very quickly. Jim's just won his second straight GM of the Year award. When I've talked to folks in the Dallas organization, everybody says the culture starts at the top with Jim. So I just wanted to ask you, do you have any favorite Jim Nill stories to kind of talk about, in terms of that culture he sets in Dallas and why the organization's been able to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of things I can go into. Jim's a first-class individual outside of hockey. You look at his wife, Becky, who's been battling terminal cancer for a long time, and how she battles that and how she makes every day about others and being about others. She brings muffins to the ushers at the arena and the TV people and equipment managers, and she pours into other people with encouragement and love and joy, and no one would know she's battling that. The cancer, and it's an inspiration. And Jim's the same way. Jim's about others. Jim pours into others. Jim, he creates a culture here where it feels so family-like, that I've experienced. And my family, my wife and my three kids, we all feel part of the Dallas Stars family. And that, you're right, that starts with Jim. I had just one story, and I think Sean knows this a little bit. I have something called EOE, which is eosinophilic esophagitis. Sometimes, I get food caught in my esophagus. There's some ridges that, depending on what kind of foods and diet I have, they don't totally know all the answers on it, but, I can get some ridges kind of caught, in my esophagus, my throat, that kind of go down into my chest, and food gets caught sometimes. I'm on medication to try and help with that. But in the bubble in Edmonton, it was in the second round. We won game 1 against Colorado. We won game 2 against Colorado. And then game 3, we were actually up in the third period, and then Colorado came back and beat us. So we just lost game 3. Everybody was disappointed. We went back to the hotel, and I got some steak and a little bit of salad caught in my throat, and I couldn't swallow. I couldn't do anything. It was turning into an emergency situation. I could breathe, because there must have been a little bit of room there. And Jim, they didn't know if they wanted to take me to the hospital. I didn't know if it was, I was trying to see if I could, get it up somehow. And it wasn't coming, and I was in a lot of pain. And Jim sat in my room with me we went up at like 1 a.m. until about 2:30 in the morning. And he sat with me, and he was the one that basically directed me, you're going to the hospital. You can't live like this. I was vomiting, my saliva, and it was painful. Like every probably 15 to 20 seconds. It was very, very, very traumatic situation for me. And Jim was there right next to me, trying to encourage me, trying to figure out, and we just lost game 3 of the second round. And it was like, that didn't matter because one of my people that's with me is struggling and I'm not leaving. And it was late and Jim sat in there, that hotel room the entire time. And, I'll never forget that. And I actually ended up going to the hospital. They had to put me under. I went to the hospital and they removed some steak, some rice, some stuff like that from my esophagus. And it, like I said, it was one of the scariest moments, probably the scariest moment of my life. And Jim Nill was right there beside me. I had to come back to the hotel then. And then maybe the worst part was, I had to quarantine for 4 days in the hotel again and get tested every day because they wanted to get me back into the bubble in Edmonton. And so I tested, I was fine. And then I got back out and then we ended up going to the finals that year, against Tampa, and it was a great run. But, that was a scary time for me. That's what type of person Jim Nill is, not hockey person, just person that Jim Nill is. And I think the world of him. And he talks a big game, but he backs up his big game because he is all about people and family and others. And I'm proud to be here because, he makes it a great place to work.
Yeah, there's always one of my favorite things about Jim that was kind of annoying at the same time when you're kind of covering him on a daily basis is you'll hear these stories sometimes and you're like, well, why didn't you this would have been great to know about then, Jim, why didn't you brag about yourself a little bit? Like that's possibly one of the most annoying things about Jim, where sometimes you legitimately wish he would brag about himself a little bit. So you knew some of this stuff. The other thing that just, I always remember about Jim, and you and I have talked about this before, but the fact that he really helped me. You talked about earlier some misconceptions, how people don't understand how hard it is to move a player and everything like that. One of the things that has always stuck for me is Jim said you need to think about the word general in general manager, where it's not just managing a roster, it's managing helping manage how a player moves their family, how the wife and kids become part of the culture. And that's something I've always remembered about Jim, he said, you need to think about that word general. It's because it's not just building a hockey roster. So I know I'm adding a story right now, but it's something that I've always thought about that kind of popped into mind when you're telling your story and everything like that, what Jim kind of has built there.
I agree 100%. And, you can go into his office and the door's open and he'll give you everything he's got in terms of attention. If it's a contract for, Jason Robertson. Okay. Big deal, right? Extending Jason Robertson, going there. We're going to talk about numbers. He has the same attention and open door policy when you're trying to talk about, we need to get another, equipment, number 3 equipment manager. He has the same attention, or so-and-so's, having a baby, or, this is what's going on in this guy's personal life that is a scout, and we need to probably be, mindful of that and talk to him. And Jim gives you the same attention, no matter how big or small everything is. And his thinking is everything's big in those employees' eyes. So he's right. If it's somebody's contract that's up staff wise, that's a big deal for them. For us, we might be sitting there going, oh, we got to sign Robertson, or we got to do this, or we got to do that, or whatever, big things that are coming on our docket. Jim's point is, yeah, but that's not big to that third guy's, the third equipment manager. His contract's important. So we need to put the attention and the importance on that, even though the world might not sit there and say, the hockey world might not sit there and say, oh, that's a priority. Jim's like, let's make that a priority because it's a priority to that employee. It's really, really, that's what kind of makes our culture a family like, is because Jim treats everybody the same way, that way in terms of importance. And that filters down to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for making us a priority of your time to come join us today and chat about all of this stuff. And every time we talk, I learn a lot, and learned a lot today when going over. I hope our listeners did as well. And thank you so much for listening. And this has been Expected by Whom? And we will be back next week, I believe, as well.
Thanks for having me on, guys. Appreciate it.